Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today I'm going to be going over my Journey Together buy list. This is going to be perfect for players who are trying to get into the new expansion. It's coming out in 3 days time, so let's start looking at the singles that we need for this expansion, starting off with the core essentials then. These are cards that are expected to be involved in either tier 1 or 2 contenders, or have obvious future potential in a ton of archetypes. Even if we don't necessarily know what decks are coming out, we can see the potential of these cards and where they could possibly fit into the metagame. Let's start off with what I think is the most powerful attacking Pokemon from this expansion. That's going to be the Lily's Clefairy EX. That Fairy Zone ability is one of the big boasts here, where we can give Dragon-type Pokemon a Psychic weakness. Now, Clefairy could end up being just a bench-sitting ability for you with other Psychic attacking decks. For example, in the Gardevoir archetype, you can now use single-prize Pokemon to carry that Dragapult a little bit more cleanly, but also there's the Full Moon Rondo attack on the Lily's Clefairy EX itself for 1 Psychic and 1 Colourless that does 20 plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon. That's both yours and your opponent's. Very similar to the old legendary beast that we've had, the Raikou, the Entei, the Suicune. All of those Pokemon saw play in their respective era, and in this case the fact that this Clefairy will be hitting for a really relevant weakness with Dragapult EX and also Raging Bolt EX being prominent threats in the post-rotation metagame. This is going to be a really powerful tech inclusion, and because Psychic plus Colourless is a really easy attack cost to get rolling, we know that Crispin is a crucial supporter card in a number of decks right now. Dragapult can incorporate this as a mirror tech card. It can go into Gardevoir, it can go into the Ogre Terror box as well, and really anything that has that hint of acceleration can justify adding in 1 copy of that Lily's Clefairy EX. If you want to go whole hog with this approach, you can also think about getting those Lily's Pearl tool cards as well. That reduces the amount of prize cards given up by your Lily's Pokemon. So not only can Clefairy be fantastic at trading into Dragapult, if it has a Pearl attached, there's a chance that it's an uptrade because the Lily's Clefairy turns into essentially a single prize Pokemon. Because we have that Area 0 Underdepths, you could easily try and build a more Clefairy focused deck that has multiple copies of this Lily's Pearl to try and force essentially a really annoying single prize beat stick, provided they're attacking into the Lily's Pearl. Next up, we have the ENS trainer cards that we have from this expansion. The ENS Zorak EX is still that focal piece, with the trade ability allowing you to discard a card in order to draw 2. Honestly, this ability is so powerful that it could end up being splashed into all sorts of archetypes, even without looking at its attack, which happens to also be pretty powerful. For 2 Dark Energy, you can choose one of your benched ENS Pokemon and use it as this attack. That's why you can also see the ENS Reshiram and ENS Darmanitan here as options that are going to go within an ENS focus deck. Reshiram has an outrage attack and also that baseline 170 damage output, which is already able to deal with Squawkabillies, and thanks to weakness, things like Mew EX. But it's likely that the ENS Zorak is also going to be supported by some tools, be it Binding Mochi and some poison stuff, or possibly the Maximum Belt as your A-Spec to push that mediocre 170 into a much better threshold. Another great attack that you can copy with the ENS Zorak is the Darmanitan's Blaze Ball Cannon that deals 90 and also 90 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, provided you discard all energy from this Pokemon. We have the ENS PP Up item card, which allows us to attach energy from our discard pile to our ENS Pokemon, so that 2 Darkness Energy attack cost is very efficient, and even when we are getting KO'd by 1 shot, or discarding energy from the Darmanitan's attack, we can still reload these Zoraks turn by turn alongside our turn attachments, so there shouldn't be too much issue here. At the same merit, the ENS Darmanitan being a fire type covers the grass weakness of Zoroark quite happily here, and it's quite often that the Zoroark build will have the reversal energy within the 60, so that your Darmanitan can actually get physically attacking as well, either with more Blaze Ball Cannons, but also that Backdraft attack, which has 30 for each energy in your opponent's discard pile. Doesn't sound all that impressive, but if you're hitting for weakness into Teal Mask Ogerpon, it doesn't take many energy to be in the discard pile for Raging Bolt players, even the Terrestrial Toolbox builds, because Pikachu discards energy. You'd be surprised at how easy it is for Darmanitan to reach KOs, whilst at the same time you can also cash in against Golden Go builds. The final ENS support card is that ENS Castle, providing free retreat for your ENS Pokemon. Again, adds more synergy to the ENS PP Up, and could be a way for you to maneuver around your ENS basics in the opening stages to maybe even get a Badoo into the active and cause that frustrating item lock. Moving on to the Hops style cards then, and Hops Dubwool kind of transcends being a Hops card in general, because the Challenge Horn is such a flexible ability on this Dubwool, where when you evolve into Dubwool, you can switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active. Historically, this has been an incredible effect throughout the years, and we've seen all sorts of iterations all see relative success. It's already seeing play in post-rotation Archaludon builds, And let's not forget that Hops Wooloo is a colourless basic that can easily be searched with Fan Rotom, which alongside Noctowl is already one of the most powerful engines in the game. I don't think it's too much to justify adding in thin packages of Double into all sorts of archetypes that can incorporate this engine. As for the rest of the Hops cards, they sort of work a little bit more together here. The Hops bag can search for 2 Hops Pokemon and put them onto the bench. And then we have a bunch of damage modifiers. The Hops Choice Band reduces the attack cost by 1 colourless energy, whilst also being a plus 30 damage mod. Postwick is a plus 30 damage mod, and Hops Snorlax, with that ability, is also buffing 30 damage. That means that both the Hops Cramorant and Hops Zacian can be attacking for 0 energy cards, which is extremely efficient. Close Cleave being a really good early game disruptive spread attack that can often take prize cards provided you can get enough buffs in play. And that Hops Cramorant can also surprisingly reach into a number of basic EXs, again combining the tool, the stadium, and the ability from Snorlax. I'm mostly looking at the Hops cards right now as pickups because I think they have massive potential. Right now I don't necessarily think we have enough of a stable draw engine to make it come together all that competitively, but we've just seen from rotation, we lose basically all of the previous turbo engine cards, you know, the Trekking Shoes, the Reddit Greninja, the Pokestop. If we start seeing eventually in more sets to come, more searching cards and more great draw abilities, I think that's where we're going to see more from a deck like this that really thrives on having more draw to find all of its pieces turn by turn. So this is more of a lying in wait package for me. Then we have a couple interesting one-offs here. We have the Levincia Stadium card. Once during a turn, you can put 2 basic lightning energy from your discard pile into your hand. This may end up being decent for the Iono's deck. You'll notice that's not on the core essentials, but it also could find its way into Golden Go, being essentially an energy retrieval card that could stick in play in certain instances, which essentially allows you to double dip from one card, which is a lot of value. And then finally, we have the Brock Scouting Supporter card. This is an interesting choose one supporter that can either get you 2 basics directly into your hand, or get you 1 evolution Pokemon directly into your hand. We've seen supporters like Lance be very powerful in the previous formats, and yes, that's a lot more value in 1 card and is more flexible than the Brock Scouting, but this is a universal option, and is importantly able to get around item lock from Budju. So if these archetypes are still going to be thriving, it may be worth adding in Brock Scouting into your deck list to give yourself more outs against that oppressive item lock. And as for the counts of cards, this is the time to take that screenshot before we move on to the Believer buy list. For the most part, I'm saying play sets for all the cheap stuff. You could easily get away with just picking up 1 Clefairy if you want to use it as a tech attacker, but go for the higher count if you're wanting to play it alongside Teal Mask Ogerpon as its own deck. Same could really be said for the End Zoroark. Pick up 4 if you want to play the Ends deck, but you could easily get by just having 2 of them picked up, and that gives you the opportunity to splash it into other archetypes just to give you a bit more draw potential and discard synergy within certain decks. For example, I've attempted this alongside Gardevoir EX in the post-rotation format, and honestly, it doesn't feel too shabby. Moving on to the Believer buy list then, these are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential in the future. We'll start off with Volcanion EX and Magmortar. Now I really think the Volcanion is the one that almost made it onto the core essentials list, thanks to that Scorching Steam ability. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may make your opponent's active Pokemon burned. That's essentially a plus 20 damage for you, but it's actually better than that because it can help you evade Pheasantipity EX from the opponent on a future turn if you happen to do the maths in the right way, where the burn is KOing certain Pokemon rather than damage from attacks. And because Latias EX is in the format, these archetypes that like to go wide could easily start their turn with a Volcanion EX in the active, knowing that you'll free retreat later thanks to that Latias. So just for this ability alone, I do quite like the Volcanion EX right now. It might be a little bit more of a dreamer pickup, but the Magmortar can actually push that burn damage to be far more substantial, with the Magma Surge putting 3 counters more on your opponent's burn Pokemon during Pokemon Checkup. This is also a stackable ability, so if you happen to be an archetype that has enough board space and enough search cards to get multiple Magmortar, you really could be cooking with that burn status condition. Next up is the Dunsparce EX. This one might be a better safe than sorry pickup. It has the Adversity Tail Attack, which is an efficient attack into decks that really do like to go wide with that Area 0, because you do 60 for each of your opponent's EX Pokemon in play, but it also has a secondary function here, the Breaking Drill for 3 colorless energy, deals 150, and the attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. There are a lot of annoying walls in the post-rotation format that are creeping into their own archetypes. And because we have that runaway draw to Dunsparce, which is a great single prize draw engine in the post-rotation meta, having 1 EX in your binder for when you need to have a wall breaker in certain archetypes might be a welcome pickup. Surprisingly, the Tapu Koko EX may be an option in the Miraidon builds. We have lost many of the great attacking V Pokemon, so this Tapu Koko may be the best solution for us. It does 60 plus 20 more for each of your benched Pokemon, so if you are playing an Area 0 build of Miraidon and have a full 8 benched Pokemon, this Tapu Koko does deal 220 damage for just 2 energy, which is of course a far cry from the Raikou. It's far less usable and splashable. You have to really pick your moments for this card, but when you do want to go wide, you of course have Tandem Unit at your disposal, so there can be situations where this will relieve some pressure on your electric generators. And at the worst of times, this is a natural free retreat Pokemon, which is another welcome include for the Miraidon players, so I think it might just make it if Miraidon stays around in the format. Then we have the Iono's archetype. I feel like the main Achilles heel of this is that both the Tadbulb and the Wattrel both have 60 hit points. I think that's such a shame for an archetype like this, because I think there's just too much punishing going on from Dragapult players and Monkey Dory and a ton of archetypes. That's one of the real things that I think holds this back from being a real top tier threat. But at the end of the day, the Killer Wattrel can draw a bunch of cards, and that Electro Streamer is a great way to get a bunch of energy into play. Bellybot itself has a reasonable damage output, but you can also look to the Iono's Voltorb as a single prize attacking threat, and of course, utilizing energy switches, possibly even Scramble Switch, you could get Iron Hands EX into the mix, or possibly even Raging Bolt. Another interesting EX is the Mamoswine. It has that great ability, Mammoth Carry, that allows you to search your deck for a Pokemon and put it straight into your hand. The longer this chunky Stage 2 stays in play, the more value you can get throughout the game. And of course, getting multiple Mamoswine powered up means you get multiple of this ability going on, so you can maintain a board state pretty happily. And naturally, building more Stage 1 and 2 Pokemon in the back means you're going to have, yes, that's right, just more engine Pokemon at your disposal. And that's exactly what this archetype needs, because the Rumbling March does 180 and 40 more for each Stage 2 Pokemon on your bench. That means you're constantly going to be building and rebuilding your Pokemon as you go, hoping to deal decent damage output with this Stage 2. Next up, a few item cards that I think are probably worth picking up. The Super Potion isn't a large amount of heal and of course forces discard of energy, which is a little bit of a pain, but there can be situations where this is going to be a nice offset for math, certainly against Dragapult players, possibly even Gardevoir players as well. The Exchange Ticket, unfortunately, is one of our better options to manipulate our prize cards. So if we have some archetypes that simply can't afford to prize certain pieces, or if you want to go skimpy on 1 counts of all sorts of different attackers in a toolbox, having Exchange Ticket in your deck might be a better safe than sorry option. And the Ruffian Supporter discards a tool and a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. Lost Vacuum does go to rotation, so having a supporter card might be one of your better options at removing tools going ahead. Another interesting Stage 2 is the Blaziken EX. It allows you to attach a basic energy card from a discard pile to one of your Pokemon. Again, it's a stackable option. What's really interesting about this card is that it's for any energy, so in theory, anything that has that awkward attack cost could attempt to have a Blaziken engine in your deck to try and fix that. I think one of the more appealing options potentially is that Pikachu EX that is always looking for extra synergy to churn out its 300 damage attack. And at the same time, the Burning Assault for 200 damage is pretty reasonable when that Fire-type coverage can push into those Ogerpon that are all over the place. And also Golden Go as well. There's an interesting Stage 2 Tyranitar in the expansion as well. It has the Daunting Stubbornness ability. While this is in the active spot, your opponent can't play any item cards from their hand. There's potential to go second, get a turn 1 Budew against the opponent whilst you build Tyranitar in the back, and effectively force the opponent out of item cards for the majority of the game. Of course, they can gust around Tyranitar to free themselves of item lock in the mid-game when you start doing more damage output than Budew, but this could potentially give you enough time to build quite a robust board in the back. And the Crackling Stomp isn't the best attack, but does add even more disruption to the opponent, which does seem to be an interesting option. There's a Stage 1 Banette that has the Cursed Speech attack that forces the opponent to shuffle 3 cards from their hand into their deck. We know that alongside Iono or even Zerosic's Machinations, we could force the opponent down to a low hand size, so if they don't have on-board abilities that can draw them out of bad situations, this could create a new hand-locking approach. There's a new basic Maractus. It has that slightly annoying ability where if it's knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, put 6 counters on them, but more importantly, it's a colourless corner attacking option, a 1 for 20, and your opponent can't retreat. Always got to keep an eye out for especially the colourless options that have corner in their text. And finally, there's the Hop Sil Cobra. It really doesn't seem impressive on the surface, but that Gnaw attack for 1 fighting, 1 colourless, which we can reduce, of course, with the Hop's Choice Band, can in theory be a beat stick. We know that the fighting type coverage is very strong right now. Pheasantipity EX is definitely one card that you're looking to hit into. And that Gnaw attack may look very unassuming, but with Snorlax plus Choice Band plus Post-Wick, you actually get to 110 damage. So when you're hitting for weakness, that's a KO'd Pheasantipity. Yes, it's a big combination, and no, the Hops archetype doesn't necessarily want to play Fighting Energy, but maybe there's a world you use Luminous Energy, and this is a single prize attacker for the archetype that isn't the Cramorant. I don't know, maybe I've overcooked with that one, just something that I thought was intriguing. And then for the counts of these cards, if you are believers in any of these archetypes, or find any of these cards intriguing, these are the counts I would recommend. That's it for the Journey Together buy list. There isn't too much, shouldn't be too expensive for the majority of players unless you want to pick up all the trainers cards. It's also looking like the product is really hard to pick up right now, so I always recommend going for singles if you can, especially if you're a competitive player and don't care too much about the artwork. I'm never going to judge anyone opening packs for the fun of it, of course, that is the whole point. But also don't buy into the hype of these packs going for insane amounts. At the end of the day, there's going to be so much of these rips that you will be able to get the singles for a really cheap price. And ultimately, I don't think there are too many you need to be picking up this time around. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Let me know what core essentials you're picking up and what believer cards you have your eye on. Get involved in the discussion down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.